Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Taxcast from the Tax Justice Network. I'm Naomi Fowler. We're broadcasting to you this month from the tax haven and secrecy jurisdiction of Jersey, one of the UK's satellite havens. So, coming up.
It seemed to be money, 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 but only for some, you understand, not for all. I noticed these things. You'd have to be completely blind not to. I could see it was grossly unfair, but then I know life can be unfair, so I wasn't shocked. I was just wondering what I could do about it.
We talked to the fire starters of the tax justice movement in Jersey. Yes, that's where it all started. Also,
Jersey politics is run by 49 individuals who stand up and say, I'm a good bloke, good businessman, vote for me. I'll look after the best interests of the island. Trust me.
we speak to a Jersey politician from Jersey's only political party. And we interview Jersey's former chief advisor to the Jersey government and the main architect behind Jersey's offshore model.
London doesn't have the political stability that we have because they have political parties which mean that they might change governments.
All that and more coming up later. But first let's talk to John Christensen of the Tax Justice Network for his take on what's happening in Jersey this month. Okay, John, so we're here in the tax haven of Jersey, and it was very interesting actually from the moment we arrived in the airport. I've never seen anything like it actually. There was signpost after signpost, advertising board after billboard, advertising offshore services, corporate this, trusts, insurance. It was all to do with offshore. It was all in your face. Wealth management. Everywhere I looked, billboards really all angled in your face as you walk out, and that's such a sure sign of a tax haven that's all about attracting money from the outside. Very beautiful place, Jersey, but you know, we see oligarchy signs everywhere, you know, ridiculous cars and Miami style bling beach houses and ridiculous amounts of glass fronts, all sorts of vanity projects. Tax havenry is really in your face everywhere you go, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I love coming to Jersey and I love the lovely weather here, seeing my friends, but it is in your face. As you say, one of the things that I see, and it's really striking 20 years after I left Jersey, to see all of these big oligarch houses, you know, they're completely out of scale with the Jersey that I know and I love, and the office blocks on the called the waterfront, the Esplanade, again completely out of scale with this tiny little island. And here we are, it's Saturday, we've got the Jersey Evening Post, and the major headline of the Jersey Evening Post says, Minister, we need law to tackle air pollution. And one of the things I've really noticed, and this comes, you know, I live in London, I really noticed the poor air quality in St Helier, and I don't remember that. And of course it's because so many people are now driving around this tiny little island. It's only kind of 9 kilometres by 14 kilometres at the max, and they're all driving in these gigantic 4x4 diesels. And what's that about? You know, the maximum speed limit, 40 miles an hour, and the minister's saying rightly, you know, we've got an air pollution problem, but we don't have the law that we need to control it. And a second headline here on the newspaper, the Jersey Evening Post, it's the island's only newspaper. The second headline is even more striking because it's talking about the announcement that Jersey has tumbled in the OECD, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, Better Life ranking. This is an index called the Better Life Index, and Jersey has fallen behind the majority of other OECD countries, now 19th place. Now, for those not familiar with the Better Life Index, this attempts to paint a fuller picture of economic success than the gross domestic product statistic, which has been in use since the 1940s. So the Better Life Index looks at a wider range of things, including health indicators, environmental quality, income disparity, inequality and so on, cost of living, employment, unemployment. Now, the good news is that Jersey people score really well on health and longevity. 81% of the islanders report themselves as feeling healthy, which is way above the OECD average. And that, I think, is something to be very proud about. The bad news, however, and we've seen this reflected in the estate agent windows that we've been looking through, housing costs are just colossal, and that leaves many people struggling to pay their rents or not able to afford a mortgage. One result of that is, of course, lots of young people leave the island because they just can't afford to live here.
Right, and housing costs are actually now the second worst in the OECD countries that were assessed, and that really is a symptom of the finance curse.
Yeah, it is absolutely a symptom of the finance curse because as much as anything else, it's the growth of this overweening tax haven activity, it's this inflow of bankers, inflow of oligarchs that have pushed the cost of housing up. The cost of housing here is so high that many people struggle with juggling their household budgets, and that means that disposable income, that is income left after paying for housing, is significantly lower than the OECD average, and that's a major failure. So when we interview, as you've done, the local proponents of the tax haven, they say it's a great success story. Actually, this is a gigantic failure on their part. And the other thing that strikes me about the Better Life Index is a measure which is known as the civic engagement measure, which looks at voter turnout. And Jersey turns out to have the lowest civic engagement score of all OECD countries, and that, I think, reflects the general contempt which we've heard from locals that we've spoken to for the political system, which has virtually none of the trappings of a modern democracy. There are no political parties, no formal government and opposition, really weak freedom of the press, that's because of lack of competition, and very few people willing to openly challenge the overwhelming power of the tax haven industry. And all of that is pure finance curse.
Yeah, apparently Jersey has the lowest voter turnouts of all the 39 OECD nations surveyed, which is shocking, actually, really shocking. And, we've heard from people why they don't bother voting, because they don't have a proper political party system. I think it's really interesting the Economic Development Minister says in response to this, he said, and I'm quoting, "Perhaps in the past we have been too focused on fiscal aspects of economic growth. While important, we must remember why we strive to be economically successful, and that is to improve the quality of life of islanders."
Well, wow. Better late than never, I suppose. But the key thing is that, I've always had this sense with Jersey, and even when I was economic advisor here, I resented it, that the sense was that growth was largely there to benefit the bankers and the very rich people. I felt very strongly that local voices were not being paid attention to. The idea was that growth, the results of growth would trickle down. It hasn't, and the OECD shows that when you look at disposable incomes for the local people compared to the OECD average, Jersey scores really badly. So the GDP per capita figure tells one story and it looks like it's really, really successful. But you always have to ask, well, whose success? Well, the bankers are certainly succeeding, the very wealthy people are certainly succeeding, but the less well off are doing very badly indeed because the cost of living is so high.
There's another really interesting thing that's going on with Jersey finance, and it's spending a lot of money on perceptions management, and they're actually paying a former military man called Sven Hughes, who worked in PSYOPs, or psychological operations, and he used to work for the disgraced Cambridge Analytica company, and he says Jersey needs an image rework. I mean, one might ask why not just spend all this money on setting up a public register of the real owners of companies, foundations and trusts. So it would be a much faster way of improving Jersey's poor image. From the Financial Secrecy Index point of view, it scores 65 out of 100 in terms of its secrecy score. But rather than tackling that, they've put money into this company whose clients have included royal families, political parties.
Well, yeah, it's fascinating because if they really wanted to improve the island's reputation internationally, all they have to do is to, as you said, create a public registry. I hope you're listening, Jersey politicians, a public registry of beneficial ownership, and include not just ownership of companies but also ownership of trusts, and they would come out of the danger zone area of the Financial Secrecy Index, and we'd probably stop talking about them as a secrecy jurisdiction. But this seems like yet another one of those tiresome exercises in manipulating public opinion. Change a few words. They seem to be particularly worried about being labelled a tax haven. Well, if it looks like a tax haven, walks like a tax haven, and talks like a tax haven, with all those signs that you mentioned in the airport, yeah, it is a bloody tax haven, and no amount of psych operations from former Cambridge Analytica people is going to change that image. That's the perception. That's the reality. But I suspect that much of this is actually targeted at young Jersey people, because what we've seen and heard whilst we've been here is that young people, the school leavers and so on, aren't attracted to working in the finance sector, and neither should they be. It's not only boring, it's harming the rest of the world. And the finance sector is finding it difficult to get young, bright things to join them. Well, as far as I'm concerned, that's a good thing, because I far prefer to see young Jersey people going out and doing something useful rather than something harmful. But this is the typical response of the Jersey finance industry, which I have to say has always struck me as being very tin-eared about these things. They don't understand that being a tax haven is an unattractive, harmful thing, and the best thing to do is to reverse out of it. So this is a very Orwellian kind of Cold War approach. It's all about propaganda. They're employing this person to change the language, deny that they are a tax haven, and make it all appear happy, smiley, frankly crap. This guy Sven's talking about we have to get rid of the legacy baggage. Well, that's not so easy when so many of the clients that Jersey still serves, going back to the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s and the noughties, these clients were a bunch of crooks from all over the bloody world. And this was confirmed to me a couple of years back when I was in the island working with Danish broadcasting, and I looked at the Paradise Papers leaks from a local Jersey law firm, and the law firm's own compliance officers had been through, and I had the list of their clients and their compliance rankings, and in every case the list was showing not compliant with this, not compliant with that. That their legacy, this runs back decades. It's very hard to get rid of that legacy, but you still have all these crooks as clients on the books, and nothing will persuade me until they make their registry public that they don't have a legacy of clients still on the books who are doing very dirty deeds across the world.
Thanks, John. John Christensen of the Tax Justice Network. Now it's time for the Taxcast special feature. As you've heard, we're in Jersey this month, one of the UK's satellite havens. It's ranked number 18 on the latest Tax Justice Network's Financial Secrecy Index. That's based on two things. Its secrecy score, which is 65 out of 100, and that's then combined with its share of the global market for offshore financial services. It's a small player, responsible for 0.38% of the global market for offshore financial services. So not massive, yet the impact and the level of political capture on the island certainly is. Jersey's signed up to some information sharing processes, but has so far resisted the UK's polite requests to set up a public register of the real owners of companies, and it still offers high secrecy levels for some offshore products. So, this month on the Taxcast, we look at life in the tax haven of Jersey.
I love Jersey, and I love the beauty and I've got a lot of friends here and I love the sea, but there's the other side. But I had lived in South America, so I learned a little bit as to, look between the lines. There was that feeling of sort of secrecy. For me, that feeling was worse here than I had experienced in Chile in 1973, which was a difficult time in Chile. But I was very surprised to find that here, that you couldn't really say your mind. You had to think very carefully before you spoke or who you said something to. It was this sort of totally amoral approach to a lot of things that amazed me, I mean, in other countries, you can go home to a suburb miles away, but you can't here. It's a whole island thing. People are frightened to step out because they want to toe the line, and it's totally understandable they want to toe the line, but sometimes you can't.
This is Jersey resident Jean Anderson. She and her friends Pat Lucas and Frank Norman were the fire starters of what became the global tax justice movement. It all began because they were so worried at the changes taking place on their island of Jersey as it developed into a tax haven and its finance sector began to dominate the island.
I'm Pat Lucas. I was born here in 1945. A lot of our island had been ruined. It seemed to be money, 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 but only for some, you understand, not for all. I don't expect this to be paradise on earth, just a society where people can work together instead of all the money flowing upwards, which I think is what's intended. But it shouldn't all flow upwards like that. Jersey has to think about other places, other countries and other people. It's not much good if we say we're the do-gooders because we give generously to Africa, if we're taking even more generously from Africa. I could see it was grossly unfair, but then I know life can be unfair, so I wasn't shocked. I was just wondering what I could do about it.
And what they did was bring together social and economic justice activists initially from nearby France, working to build a network in Jersey and raising money to strengthen that campaign in quite a hostile environment.
Lots of us got together, really, and we did all sorts of things like boot fairs, raising money and singing in the street. We did amazing things. It was an effort, it was a combined effort, and we just did our best, because all you can ever do is your best. And if you think something's important, you have to pull out all the stops.
Then Pat made a phone call asking for help. Jerseyman John Christensen had left the island after serving as government economic advisor for more than a decade. Pat had heard him speak on the damage the offshore business model was doing to Jersey. His name had become notorious in Jersey's finance community for his criticisms of what he called the Jersey disease, which we now call the finance curse, and his dramatic resignation in 1998. As Taxcast listeners will know, John's a regular on the Taxcast, and he's the co-founder of the Tax Justice Network in 2003. That turned into a global movement, and it all started with Pat's phone call. Here's Jean Anderson again.
Pat just picked up the phone one day and said, I'm going to talk to John. So that really was the beginning of that. And things got sort of sparky, didn't they?
I think it was a Wednesday night. And I was so pleased because he said, come and see me. I knew he was the right person for the job. I knew that he would do something.
So we bundled ourselves off over there and had a very nice get-together. And he says, what do you want to do? And Pat said, kill the tax havens.
And he said, it's going to take a long time. You can't just deal with one little island, tax haven. If you're going to do it, you're going to have to do it, all of it. So it will take time. And it will take time.
And when someone wants to change things in a place like Jersey, it's a real challenge. One interesting feature of some small island low-tax jurisdictions is that they don't tend to have conventional functioning political party systems. Voter turnout is, unsurprisingly, shockingly low. I met one woman in the street who hadn't voted for 40 years, until now. Here's elected deputy Jeff Southern, co-founder of Reform Jersey, currently the only political party in Jersey. Can you summarise your experience of doing politics in Jersey?
Certainly. The first thing to notice is we don't have a politics in Jersey. We're creating it now. We have in Reform Jersey, the only political party in Jersey stands on a platform and tries to adhere to its platform. That's unique in Jersey politics because Jersey politics is run by 49 individuals who stand up and say, I'm a good bloke, a good businessman, vote for me. I'll look after the best interests of the island. Trust me. And very little else usually in terms of policy. The other barrier is that standing as individuals, you don't actually get to elect the chief minister or the ministers, so you don't elect anybody to take charge of a particular area. There is no coherent policy around that. The public gets what the states decides by picking the chief minister. So there's very little connection between what you vote for on the outside and what you get. And that's the basic problem of Jersey politics. It's an intensely conservative small c and large c island.
Not everyone in Jersey sees the lack of political parties as a problem. This is Colin Powell, former chief advisor to the Jersey government. He's credited as being the architect of Jersey's development as a secrecy jurisdiction and tax haven.
Jersey, when it started off as an international finance centre, was very much geared to the UK. And UK residents were using Jersey to take advantage of tax avoidance opportunities, legitimate tax avoidance opportunities. But progressively, as one might expect, the UK government brought about tax changes which limited the opportunities for UK residents to do that. But what happened here was that the industries said, well, obviously the UK business is drying up, well, we'll go abroad and we'll find the business abroad. And there are certain aspects of the business that we do which we are specialists in and which are of appeal to many people around the world, such as trust formation and administration, putting their assets into a protective position. And that business isn't strong in London, and there is obviously the concern that some people would have that London doesn't have the political stability that we have because they have political parties which mean that they might change governments.
Yep, democracy and political parties will do that. Deputy Jeff Southern of Reform Jersey, the island's only political party.
We have made progress. We have got policies put forward by Reform Jersey. No other parties yet. We're looking forward to seeing some more parties form in the next few years. I think it's inevitable. Otherwise, I don't know what we're going to do. When I first started, for example, we didn't have an employment law. We didn't have redundancy payments. We didn't have a minimum wage. And we didn't have a living wage. We have now, thanks to efforts from me and my colleagues in terms of taking us forward. So to that extent, in the 18 years that I've been in the States, we are making progress, slowly but surely.
Inequality levels, let's talk about that in Jersey.
We've got tremendous inequality, much higher Gini coefficient than the UK. We've got the bottom quintile of earnings reduced by 17%, 30% after housing costs in the last income distribution survey. So we've got severe gaps between the rich and the poor here. We've got a lower minimum wage than the UK has, despite the fact that it's 20% at least more expensive to live here than it is in the UK on average. We've had 20 years of intermittent freeze or reductions in public sector workers' pay. The most recent award was below inflation. And we've had recently the first strikes on the island for many, many years. That dispute continues because we've had a decade of below inflation pay awards and people, public sector workers are just saying enough is enough.
They're desperate.
They're desperate, yes. They've seen their purchasing power, their effective rate of pay reduced by of the order of between 12 and 17% over the past decade. And when that sort of cuts are taking place, 1/6 of your income seeming to disappear, you start to feel it.
Yeah, at the same time, the finance sector is paying very, very, very well for those that are involved in that sector. How much of a consequence of the finance curse is that, where you've got this unequal distribution of, you know, the supposed benefits of such a large finance sector?
Well, the end result of that two-tier system is that the price of everything goes up. It's a very expensive place to live. If we look at the price of housing, An ordinary 3-bed with a bit of garden will cost you of the order of 550 to 600,000 now on the island, and we've just seen prices and rents in particular go up by 9% last year. Cost of food, every time my relatives come to Jersey, they just can't believe how expensive it is. It's a very expensive place to live. And what we're noticing now is that it's increasingly difficult to recruit and retain public sector workers. If we look at the shortage of nurses, that's extremely marked here in terms of having to use locum GPs and doctors, consultants. That's also marked. But it extends to the other end of the scale. If we look at carers in people's homes or in retirement homes, then again we can't attract those either because it's simply too expensive to live here. The same applies to social workers. Enormous problems we have in dealing certainly with mental health issues amongst our young people. It's very hard to do that when you've got locum social workers who are here for a year, maybe 2 years, and then they're gone again. There's no consistency. If you can't build up that trust, then the system doesn't work as well as it could. It's extremely difficult to recruit to Jersey nowadays. We're running on minimum staffing. The word is that there are currently 600 vacancies that we're running with in the public sector.
That's quite a lot on a small island.
And on a small island, the total workforce, 7,000 public sector. That's significant.
Again, not everyone sees the problem. Former Chief Advisor Colin Powell.
Certainly following the financial crisis, there was a kind of downturn in profit levels of the financial services sector in particular, and that could turn around quite quickly if there was an increase in interest rates, for example. I think there's always a demand, obviously, for more public services. I think that by comparison with elsewhere, I think Jersey stands out quite well. If you look at the kind of health service and education service, it compares quite well with that which is available, say, within the UK or within Europe. There's always a kind of demand for more. And so at the moment there is no pressure.
Jeff Southern of Reform Jersey.
The high wages and high rents paid by the finance sector have an overwhelming impact on the rest of the economy. It's very difficult to set up other skills and industries when effectively it's a high price economy, and we're talking about 1/3 of the workforce employed by finance and 50% of the GDP produced by finance. So it's something that has a hold on all of society. One of the issues, I think, is that we have to accept that we are no longer living in a low cost, low spend society, low tax, low spend society. Given the ageing demographic and the demands on hospitalisation and etc. that are inevitably going to be made, given our population as it grows, then we have to accept that either we reduce services or we tax some more to supply the services that we desperately need. We take the view in Reform Jersey that we should be looking at higher taxes in order to meet the needs of our society. Now, if you're going to start raising taxes in Jersey, you're going to get shouted down. How do you do that in a fair way? The answer is, I think, inevitably, that we must tax the wealthy, the rich, those on high incomes, more than we currently do. We've got a flat rate of tax, 20%, effectively, in Jersey, right up the scale. We cap our social security payments so that the rich, once they pay something like over 50,000 or thereabouts, don't pay a penny more. So our whole system is skewed to keeping the tax we pay as low as possible, certainly for those at the better off end of the spectrum.
Pat Lucas and Jean Anderson would agree.
I would like to see fairness in Jersey. Lots of us work very hard and we are quite severely taxed, I think. And we also pay the doctor as well. We pay for everything. It's not envy, but I think that if those who could afford more could pay more, then those of us who can afford a little less could pay a little less. It would be fairer, because people are doing their very best, but it's very hard to keep up, because it's like running to stand still.
Ordinary people are taxed so high, whatever they say, and those who come with large wallops of money aren't.
What's galling, I think, is that it's not just our rich that are better off, it's the people who don't live here, the wealthy who don't live here. And that is the object of our tax policy, to save them tax. Those who are better off must pay a little more. We've already got a plan, a very minor plan really, adjustment. This 20% tax rate across the board, we're saying should be 25%. Because if you add in the allowances at the lower end, then what I actually find is that 95% of our population will be better off under this higher tax rate. It was only the top 5-6% that would be paying more. But the extent of the tax reach is such that actually we'd raise £7.5 million a year more.
Colin Powell, Jersey's former chief advisor.
There may be obviously amongst the community people might say, well, let's increase the tax rates, but there's no pressure to increase the tax rates. Then there's a question as to what's the knock-on effect of increasing the tax rate. If you tax in corporate profits, does that simply mean that the corporate business moves elsewhere? So you have to be sure that if you move your tax rates up, that there are not places elsewhere that are not moving their tax rates up, and so what happens is the business moves, so you don't end up with any more income. In fact, you end up with less income. So it's something that you have to address. Always have to keep
income
in mind.
Tax.
Well,
There's some very high earners in the finance sector that paying not so different rates to people on a lower income.
There might be, but again, it's a question. But I think what you find is if you actually look at the kind of facts, is that again there is a question as to whether people take evasive action and whether they move themselves or they decide to go somewhere else.
That's interesting that he thinks raising income taxes for the wealthiest by the very modest amount the Reform Jersey Party is suggesting would lead to a significant exodus and a drop in overall revenue. Whether that's actually true or not, the Tax Justice Network argues that this is the whole danger of cutting taxes. It can start a race to the bottom, and there's temptation for governments there, thinking they're going to attract more business. But eventually the logic is everything hits 0% tax and below. And what then? Everybody suffers, except those at the very top of the tree. Okay, I want to ask you about something I read that you said. If the attractions of Jersey as a low tax area stem from the high levels of UK taxation, the island shouldn't be criticised for offering an escape. I wanted to ask you about that because there is an example of Jersey which is acting in a way that is ensuring there isn't a level playing field in the sense that they're attracting...
No, that's a totally different picture. What we're saying is that each country sets its tax rates according to its own domestic requirements. So you set your tax rates having regard to what you feel is necessary to fund your public services and generally support your economy. And then if you have other countries that have high tax rates, and as a result of having those high tax rates, then have lack of provision for restricting the ability of their residents to take advantage of lower tax rates in other countries, then it's beholden upon those countries to change their tax laws. And that is basically what we said going back as far as the UK is concerned. And that's what they've done. That's what they've done.
But it does have the effect of bringing everybody starts to go downwards to the point
it's not.
Where...
It's not. But what I'm saying is they can have their tax. What is of concern to people is that They have their high tax rates for very good reasons that they want to fund service, like the Scandinavians. They then need to ensure that their residents are fully liable to those tax rates and can't escape those tax rates by moving their funds offshore or moving themselves in a situation where they have income offshore. Any country can take whatever measures it feels appropriate to limit the ability of its residents to escape its own tax liabilities. And that's totally different from saying that they've got to reduce their tax rate. That is a different argument.
So, I've heard from so many people here that Jersey isn't raising enough revenue for its own public services. Now I'm hearing that Jersey's offshore industry isn't the problem when it comes to undermining the tax base of other countries. The problem is apparently entirely on the shoulders of those other countries for not adequately protecting themselves. Except there's a limit to the extent that countries, especially poorer countries, can protect themselves from some kinds of offshore business, either from highly secretive trust structures or from companies channeling profits artificially through a jurisdiction like Jersey to take advantage of Jersey's corporate tax rate for many companies of 0%. Even if other countries did make it illegal for their citizens to open bank accounts in Jersey or incorporate companies in Jersey, it would be impossible to properly track and verify without Jersey systematically collecting and automatically sharing or publishing beneficial ownership information, company ownership information. And the automatic information sharing processes in place are full of loopholes. Sadly, they're designed that way. Not all necessary information is collected, and data's not shared with every jurisdiction. So we go round and round in circles. Next, I wanted to ask why Jersey, if it really wants to improve its reputation, is still resisting setting up a register of the real owners of companies. In terms of public registers of beneficial owners, Jersey's resisted that quite strongly, haven't they?
Well, we resisted it in terms of timescale, I think probably is the best way of putting it, because we recognise there's a direction of travel there, but we feel that the best way of dealing with issues of financial crime is to ensure that the law enforcement and tax authorities have information which is accurate, adequate, very timely, in other words, immediate. At the present time, they get that much more through bilateral or multilateral relationships they have with us, and not from public registers, which is to some extent why there's been no kind of great rush for an international standard on public registers, because I think law enforcement and tax authorities are really saying, well, we don't see a great value in a public register. We've certainly got no pressure from the National Crime Agency to go down the road of a public register. And as far as our relationship with the UK is concerned, and we have a good relationship with them and they're satisfied on our standards, and we're conscious of the fact that the European Union has set out its stall as requiring the member states all to have public registers, and so we're going to consult with our industry on following suit in due course. And I suppose, it's a question I suppose I've wanted to put to the NGOs was just how much use have you put the UK public register to date? To what extent has an NGO like Tax Justice Network or Global Witness kind of looked at what's on the public register and said, that's something totally novel and new to us, and something that's given us a new insight into something. We haven't seen any publicity given to that, and I suspect that's because, as I say, when Global Witness did their analysis, they found that because of the lack of verification, the information was quite poor. I suppose you might expect it. If you're a criminal and you know there's no verification, and someone is asking you to register with a company's house, and you're a criminal whose name is known as a criminal, you're not going to put down that you're the beneficial owner.
It's certainly true that there are weaknesses we'd like to see strengthened, but it's certainly not true to say public registers of the real owners of companies information hasn't been extremely useful. Financial crime consultant Graham Barrow of the excellent Dark Money Files podcast uses Companies House data all the time. That's the mechanism by which information on beneficial owners, the real owners of companies, are accessible online via open data. You can get annual accounts, directors' names and addresses, shareholders' information, and finding discrepancies and oddities is all part of the telltale signs of mischief. You can now do all that sort of detective work through an online search or via a full download of the entire dataset, which has, by the way, more than 6 million entities. Graham.
I use Companies House every single day as part of my investigative work. It's where I first discovered the name of Ali Moulay on 2 sets of accounts filed by 2 of the Deutsche Bank mirror trading companies, and that ultimately led me to 6,000 other LLPs on whose behalf it signed accounts and about 20,000 sets of accounts, and also opened up the fact that this was a small but important part of a global laundromat activity. And that is one of just dozens of investigations that I do using Companies House data.
You can read more on Graham's investigations on www.grahambarrow.com. Here's Colin Powell again on not making information on the real owners of companies public.
So we see the direction of travel, so it's not a case of opposed to it, it's a case of working with the international community, working with the European Union to ensure that what is done is effective.
Yeah, I mean, it's a slow process working with the international community, isn't it? You know, Jersey cares about how it's perceived by the rest of the world, and there is pressure around these issues, you know, to open things up more than they are currently, however imperfectly they work. Why not just jump with both feet?
We argued that what was needed was a level playing field, a global level playing field. That's not saying that we're not saying there that everybody has to be doing it, you know, before we do it.
Right, because that would be 100 years.
That would be wrong. What we're saying is that everybody should be expected to do it. Although, you know, say the UK would like us to obviously to follow down that path, we haven't seen that kind of international pressure. We have an open mind on this, and we're certainly not rejecting the principle, we're not rejecting the direction of travel.
So, they could do it now, but they're not. It's worth pointing out that their own tax treaties, like tax treaties between jurisdictions everywhere, are full of holes with vague definitions of company, permanent establishment, dividend, interest, and that vagueness interacts problematically with local laws at both ends of the tax treaty. As I mentioned earlier, automatic information exchange under the Common Reporting Standard, which Jersey is signed up to, also has plenty of loopholes. So this concern over loopholes does seem to be selective. Jeff Southern again of Reform Jersey.
If you want to raise taxes, which taxes do you raise? The danger is that we go simply for the easiest option, which is to raise GST, or VAT as you would call it, which only stands at 5% now, but is clearly regressive. It doesn't have an exemption for food, for example, which the UK does.
So it's going to hit poorer people all over again.
Absolutely regressive and hit poor people.
That's very often the way that tax havens go. When they get into a crisis, and it's absolutely typical that they'll always opt for the sales tax because it's easy, it's immediate, it's not going to annoy the very wealthy in the island.
And that's the danger.
Back to Pat Lucas.
I would like to see lots of things happen in Jersey, but I think the people running the island have to have lots and lots of courage. There's not a lot about. Not really. It's selfishness we have to do away with. That's the bottom of it. That we have to start to say a little more every day. It's not all about me. It's all about us. And then we'll probably get somewhere.
That's it from us from the Taxcast in Jersey this month. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next month.